Hello and welcome back to Book Lust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today at University Bookstore is novelist and book aficionado Erica Bauermeister, and we're going to talk about her forthcoming book due out May 21st called The Scent Keeper and everything else that's bookish. Erica, so glad you came today.
Wonderful to be here.
So let's start with The Scent Keeper. Tell me where the idea for this came from.
I became fascinated by the subliminal power of smell back when I was writing Joy for Beginners, my second book, and I had a character she was kind of a perfume matcher, a yenta for perfume, as it were. And I was doing all this research, and I read one of Oliver Sacks' books, and he was writing about a patient who had had this dream that he was a dog, and he had all of the sensibilities of a dog, and when he woke up he still had them, and the world was sort of this three-dimensional, amazing, olfactory place, and he kept that for about 3 weeks, and at the end it went away. And I thought, what would it be like if you could tune your sense of smell to such an amazing level? And, or if you were sort of raised by olfactory wolves, as it were,
right.
What would a child be like who would then have to come into our world, and how naive we would seem, or ignorant, because we're not paying attention to so much sensory input that we're getting, and yet it's affecting us at the same time. And so it was sort of that philosophical idea, and then I just had this image of a young girl in a cabin, all the walls are lined with drawers, and in every drawer there's a different scent. And I didn't know why she was there or what the scents were, and I tracked her for 6 years.
So it was a while between your second novel and this one. Was that taken up with scenting out, if you will, this new novel?
Yeah, I went at it in multiple ways. So all my books in the past have been interconnected short stories, and I started this as a multiple point of view book. I had 3 different points of view, and it just wasn't working. And then I tried 2 points of view, and that wasn't working. And then I tried 4 points of view, and that was, and finally one morning I woke up and literally her voice, Emmeline's voice, was in my head. And I knew that was right, and the first chapter is basically what just flowed out of me that morning. And once I had her voice, and once I knew it was her story, then it came through.
So The Scent Keeper is about a young girl, Emmeline, raised by her father on an island in this wonderful cabin that I just predict that everybody who reads the description of that cabin with the drawers, I mean, it just was so an amazing image that I just put the book down at that point and I said, I want to live in a cabin like that with all those drawers and on really a deserted island. Why was that? I guess I'm interested in, and you have a history of reading and kind of analyzing or thinking deeply about literature. How did that all come together for you? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think I've always been curious about this idea of being raised in isolation. What's the pure person without all the societal constructs around them? And then I realized, well, that's actually not true, because our parents are our first societal construct. Nice. And Emmeline's father has created her world, which is why when she is suddenly forced to leave it, it's so utterly confusing to her, because she thinks that this is how the world is. And that was another thing I was interested in following. It's a book, and it's probably not coincidental that this was written during and then after my mother died, because a lot of it is about sort of what I see as 3 cognitive steps toward understanding our parents. We start, and they're our whole world, which is why it needs to be an island, right? Because you don't know, your parents are your reality. You accept what they tell you, for good or ill, you accept their reality. And then there's that second step, usually when you're a teenager and you're trying to define your own identity. And then usually you're mad at them. You're banging against them in order to create your own identity.
Right.
And then hopefully there's that third stage where you come to see them as human beings. And that's part of why this book is in 3 parts and it's in 3 different locations. But that was sort of the philosophical underpinnings. The scent part, of course, I was thrilled by. I think that idea of the scent drawers came from going to see the Tutankhamun exhibit way back, and there was this kind of a spice cabinet, and it had all these little drawers, and you could open them and smell the different scents. And I wanted to take that thing home,
Right.
So I think all these things come together and form a book.
Yeah, the drawers reminded me a little bit of the old typesetter drawers, where you pulled it out to get the S's and the A's and the various things like that. The names in this book, Fisher is Emmeline's friend, important friend to her. Like Emmeline, he's an outcast when they both go to school, which is a big, Emmeline's leaving her father, even when she goes to school and meets Fisher, it's really a shock to her because it's more people than she's ever been around.
Yes. And he, I love him. One of the hardest things about switching to first person point of view was that he had been one of the point of views, and I honestly think that's some of the best writing I've ever done, and I had to cut it because the book needed to be something different.
When you're reading a book on your own, not connected to just for fun, let's say, which I know you do all the time. What are you looking for in that book? And do you, in your book, in your fiction, is that what you're writing?
That's a good question. These days I both listen to books and read books, and I listen to very different books than I read. So if a book is going to be lyrical and have gorgeous sentences, I listened to 2 seconds of the Crawdad, where the Crawdad's saying, I thought, no, I have to read that because I want to read those sentences. I want the feeling of my eyes pulling those amazing, long, gorgeous sentences into my brain, Other books I love to listen to because it forces me to slow down. I'm much more analytical when I'm listening to a book. And if I want to concentrate on, all right, I want to figure out plot, I want to work on characterization, I'll listen to a book, or I'll listen to nonfiction. And so it really shifts. But I love to read books that are lyrical, that are more character-driven. I remember when you and I were talking about new ways to classify books, and whether you were a plot-driven or a character-driven. And character-driven.
Yes.
Absolutely. Although this has plot, actually. For the first time, I really do have plot. I'm very proud of myself.
Well, do you think that then the difference is the difference between the Scent Keeper, which has an arc?
Yes.
It's one that, so plot, people who read for plot, people who love to turn the pages to find out what happens next, will find this book very much to their liking, I'm guessing, as well as people who are interested in character and character development. But when you're talking about interconnected short stories, it's harder to develop. Do you think it's harder to bring plot out?
I think the plot is less important.
Yes.
What's important is kind of the overarching connections that form, so that the plot isn't based to any one person. The plot is more this idea that you're pulling together. So in School of Essential Ingredients, the kind of overarching idea was, that we are all separate and yet all connected in ways that we may or may not ever realize. There are moments in School of Essential Ingredients where the reader gets to go, oh, but the character will never see that.
Yes.
And I love the kind of the quiet deftness of that. And there are times, I think you can still do it with a plot-oriented book. I wanted there to be times in School of Essential, in Scent Keeper, sorry, where the reader still sees things that, even though Emmeline is an older character looking back on her life, she might still not get, or the reader might get it before she allows that realization in herself.
Was there one of your novels that was harder for you to write? I know you've talked about with The Scent Keeper, your struggles to find the right voice. Was that the same?
This was the hardest I've ever, partly because I really thought that because I'd written 3 novels,
Right.
Of course I could just switch over to this, and it's a whole different skill set. And I always try that with every book. I want to try something new. I want to learn something new, not just content, but also some kind of structural lesson. I want to keep growing as a writer. And I just didn't realize quite how much I'd have to grow on this one. But I'm so glad I did it.
Do you have, not necessarily the name of a person, but an ideal reader?
You know, some of my favorite readers are the ones that have written me about School of Essential Ingredients or Scent Keeper or Joy,
Right.
any of them, and said, I never paid attention to that before. And, you know, all of a sudden now I'm smelling things, I'm aware of things, and I love to make that connection. So it's often, you know, there'll be people anybody who loves perfume and fragrance and subliminal things and marketing and branding, they're all gonna like this. But I love the ones that come in that say, oh, I wasn't sure, I just kind of like the cover or whatever,
Right.
you know.
Yep.
I always wanted
Yeah.
to be that book you found at the airport bookstore on your way to a trip and you realize, oh no, I don't have a book. And it kind of, you find it, and it ends up being the thing that makes your plane ride disappear. I always wanted to be that book, you know? Because I'm grateful to those books.
And so, do you remember what the last book that you bought in an airport bookstore that made the trip bearable?
Yes, The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake, one of my favorite books of all
Amy
time.
Bender's
Yes,
book. Oh,
yes.
that is a wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful book.
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh. Yeah, I haven't read anything much new from her in
I hope she
a
has one
long
soon.
time.
I really love her
Oh,
stuff.
yes, I do too. So you talked about the books that you have in the front hallway of your house that anyone can take because you've enjoyed them and you want to share them.
Right, right.
So what are some of those books?
Oh, goodness.
I know that's the hardest question.
So, and actually what I've started doing is giving away books on my Facebook page so that they can go to an even broader audience. So the last one was The Last Romantics, Tara Conklin's book, which I just adored. I thought that was a beautiful book. And Away is on there right now.
The Amy Bloom Away?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
So
a,
it's really
that's
it's
a
this
wonderful.
weird, you know, like it's an odd range of new books and old. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. It's just this. It's a very eclectic group in the end. But you know, they're fun, and because I'm a writer, people are always saying, "Oh, you got a book I can borrow?" And it's like, "Yes, this shelf, go for it." You know.
I thought they were going to say, well, since you're a writer, do you want to hear a great idea for a novel that I have?
Sure. Yeah, yeah. I have a great life story, and
Right.
you know,
It
you
just
should
needs
write
the-
it for free. But if it makes a
Right.
lot of money, I might give you some. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
I get a lot of those.
Right. You're just the perfect person to do
Yes.
my
Yep.
fictional biography.
Yep. And you know, but that's everybody has a story, and I mean, I'm glad that more and more people are getting them out there.
Yes.
You know.
They do, everyone does. Everybody's story is so interesting. The individual paths that they take to who they are, which is why I like books like this that give you a beginning. Emmeline on this island with her father, nobody else, and then growing out to where she'll end up. I love the names. Emmeline, Fisher. Where did those? Did you struggle? Do you struggle with names?
I struggle sometimes with keeping them because she was Emmeline from the very beginning. There was no question. But it's a hard one. People keep wanting to call her Emmeline, and it would have been so much easier to change her name.
Yes.
And I couldn't. So I had to put in these cues. This is
Right.
how you pronounce it, you know, in the book.
And I was so grateful for that cue because I thought Emmeline is the more common pronunciation. But then I wondered, you know, how am I supposed to pronounce this? Because I think I kind of hear the the words in my head when I'm reading or something weird like that. And I was so happy that you had that little hint, more than a hint, sort of a hit you over the head. Right. This is how it's pronounced.
Exactly.
And I loved that you said you couldn't change it, because I had that experience in George and Lizzie with a kind of minor character that my editor said, all the males in this book begin with George, James, and then I can't remember who the third one is, George and James, and don't you think you should maybe change one of those three? And so I thought, well, the one I could more easily change was James. So I thought and thought and thought. This took probably several weeks to try to, and asked everybody. And finally I settled on Richard. Maybe he could be called Richard. And then I did one of those universal changes. And then read the paragraph with Richard, and then I said, no, he's James. Yeah. So I totally get that you couldn't change.
Well, and their characters are kind of like children. They come to you and they are their own person, and your job is to help them be their best person. That doesn't necessarily mean good, but they're fullest, they're incarnation of themselves. And I really don't feel like I get the choice to change it if they are hard down on it. I don't get to change it.
Yeah, I like that, and I like that Fisher's name was unusual.
And it had to be water-based, particularly because he doesn't want to go out on the water with his dad.
Right. Were there parts of this book, when I was reading it, I could see parts of this book that I imagined you didn't want to write because you didn't want to
hurt anybody
or confront that reality. How did you deal with that?
I had some very good early readers who pushed me and just said, you have to, well, we can't, spoiler alerts, we can't go too far. But,
yes.
But I tend to be reserved. And so I really needed people to push me and go, nope, you got to take it a step further. You got to let her feel these things. You got to let all the characters feel these things. And that was why it was a hard book to write too.
Yes, right, because it took it further than perhaps you would, well, we don't want to give anything away, but you had to deal with, how about this? You had to deal with realities in the characters' lives.
Yes, and write them as scenes.
Right. And that, I think, would be very difficult.
Yes.
Were you going to say something?
No, just that some of them I wrote at Hedgebrook, which is a women writers colony, and that was such a safe place to be. And so some of those scenes came out there because I felt I was in a cabin, and I could go places that I needed to go.
Yeah, that sort of enforced loneliness that you get at a writer's retreat like that is so valuable and scary to confront. At least that's how I found it. Yeah. Did you always know you wanted to be a writer?
Yes.
From a little girl?
Yeah, from a little girl. But what was interesting was, I tell this story that in college I read, we were reading all these big, epic Moby Dick kind of books, right? And I just didn't care. And then we read Tilly Olson's I Stand Here Ironing, and I just said, that's what I want to write. I want to take those small things and show people their importance. And at the same time, I was 22, and I did not have the world life experience to write that. And so it took me, I was 50 when my first novel was published. And I don't mind that because I needed to build up that life experience. And so, and I was practicing my craft. I was putting in my 10,000 hours. Yeah. I read the early stuff I wrote, and I'm glad it wasn't published. Sometimes it just takes a while.
What else what about your life do you feel has been the most important part of your becoming a writer?
Being a mom.
For
several reasons. One is, all the things that come with giving part of your life to other people and watching people grow. But there's also this other part, which is, I would call my mom and go, oh my God, I'm so sorry I did this to you. And I don't know, some people are born wise. I needed that experience in order to kind of come to, and that a lot of it is in here, that ability to see my parents as human beings. And I think that's an incredibly important step in becoming a human being yourself. And I think that so many of the times in my books where I slow down and go into someone's emotions, it's because I spent all that time either with young kids trying to say, okay, what are they feeling? What are they thinking? How can I help? Or then turning and looking at my parents as they grew older. And then, right before School of Essential Ingredients was finished, I had several friends die. And kind of walking them through that process, walking with them through that process. And I think those huge life moments affect us and change how we write.
You belong to a writing group.
I do.
A long-time writing group. It's gone on for a number of years now. What do you find about that helps you or sustains you?
Well, actually, I have a couple. So there's the Seattle 7 writers, which is this big group of 88.
Right.
That they're my tribe, they're my village. I met Jenny Shortridge and Garth Stein, who founded it right as my first book was coming out, and they just took me by the hand and walked me through what I needed to do, and it was amazing. And I would not have, I don't think, have become a professional author if it hadn't been for that experience of finding these other authors who were farther along than I was. So that's been incredible. And I've also had writing groups over the years that are the wordsmithing ones, the workshopping ones.
And talk about those.
I'm one of those people that likes to write and then get feedback. I got my PhD at the University of Washington during a time when it was all about writing groups. It was when they were first starting. And I was really inculcated in that idea that feedback is helpful, can be helpful. And I deeply appreciate the other writers that read my work, and they're my safety net. They catch me before it's published and say, did you mean to say that? And I'm like, no, I did not mean to say that, or, oh, I forgot to say that, or whatever. And that back and forth, I learned so much, both from critiquing and from being critiqued.
You got a PhD in English and didn't get, as far as I can tell, an MFA.
No, I didn't.
Do you regret not having an MFA, or do you feel like your experiences with those writing groups has kind of equaled that for you?
That's an interesting question. I think it's the combination of that, and the first two books I wrote actually weren't novels, they were reader's guides.
Right.
And for 500 Great Books by Women, I probably read 3,000 books.
Right.
And that honestly was better than graduate school in terms of just, because I had to analyze each one and explain why it worked.
Right.
And so really it was taking this gorgeous, and in a perfect book, it's a seamless machine, right? You don't see the moving parts.
Right.
But I had to lift the lid and look at what are the moving parts, what makes this book work or not work. Yeah. And that was an incredible education.
Do you think about updating that book ever?
We're just talking to publishers because there's so much online now.
Right.
There's an amazing website called A Mighty Girl that has 3,000 listings for, we were going to redo Let's Hear It for the Girls, which is the second reader's guide we did.
For young women.
And I think it's out there. And as much as I would love the chance to go back and read all those books.
I mean, what I'd like to see are those books put online with the original content, but then updated all the time with every new book that you read.
Yeah.
Because I think that analysis that you do would be so interesting now because of the novels that you've written since.
Yes.
I think, for everything that you read, do you read it? I see a difference between reading as a reader and reading as a writer.
Yes.
Do you read as a reader or do you read as a writer?
It varies.
Okay.
It really does vary. I love it when I can get so caught up in a book that I stop paying attention to the mechanics of it.
Right.
But that takes a pretty good book for
It
me
does.
to do.
It does.
And then when it's a book that doesn't work for me, I find that ability to read like a writer to be very soothing, because I can go in and figure out, okay, how would it be different? You know, how would I have done this differently? Granted, it's not my book. I understand that.
Right.
But once I can sort of, in my mind, make it a whole, then I can let it go. But until I can do that, I have a hard time.
What I find is that I've started doing things like saying, oh, that's why that character was there then. You know, that's why that writer made that decision, because this happened 200 pages later and you needed that, which doesn't always make for kind of seamless reading. You know, because I stop and think too
Right.
much, I think.
But I also think, I mean, in all my books, I try to give the reader the opportunity to read at multiple levels. So I want it to be that you could just read straight through and not feel like there's any in-jokes or weird, you know.
And there isn't.
Right, it's not opaque in some way. But then I always have what I call the Easter eggs, you know, where if you want to take it a level lower and go deeper, then, you know, in Scent Keeper, there's repeating images all the way through. They're repeating lines all the way through. Different chapters have the same name. And the opportunity to go back in there if you want. If you're an analytical person and you want to take it apart, you can go, oh, okay, well, why is this chapter the dinner and the dinner?
Right.
Why would she do that twice?
Right. Oh, was that a misprint? No, it was not.
It actually
a misprint.
wasn't a misprint. You know, we did it on purpose.
Right.
And so, you know, I like having it so that there is an ability. Like the last line is a repeat. And your vision of the book will change if you figure out where it was originally in the book. But do you need to know that in order for the ending to have an ending? No.
Right. Right. In the minute or so that we have left, what are you reading now that you're enjoying?
I'm reading thrillers because I'm playing around with the idea of writing a literary thriller.
Oh my gosh.
I told you I'd try something new. I want to try something new every time.
Wow. I would love to be an early reader of that book. So is there anybody in particular any thriller writers that you're...
Oh, I just read Tim Johnston's The Current, which I thought was fantastic. I'm really attracted to thrillers that are literary, that where they're gorgeous sentences and they're big paragraphs, and there's a deep philosophical underpinning, and it all makes sense, right? That it isn't just some weird twist that really seriously shouldn't be in there. You know, there are plenty of those going on.
Now, so Tana French's books, have you read those?
Yep.
The first one, Into the Woods, was, I think, for me, the best one. The first three were really good, but the first one especially.
Yep.
But those are exactly what we would call literary thrillers, I think.
Yeah. And I kind of love the satiric possibilities in there. You know, it just gives you an ability to play that. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to say any more because you never know, because sometimes things don't happen.
Yes.
So.
No, you never know, and sometimes you just don't want to say it because that'll sort of knock the wind
magic will
out
fly
of,
away.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Erica, I certainly hope that that you do that new direction, or if not, another great character-driven, heavy plot novel like The Scent Keeper. And thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.